On Tuesdays, we take extra time for political news.
Mary Grace Scully joins us now.
President Trump's foreign policy is in the spotlight tonight. The president is in Florida entertaining Japan's prime minister as they talk about North and South Korea. But back in Washington, politicians are still focused on Syria and Russia. NBC's Blaine Alexander has the latest.
President Trump hosting Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe at Mar-a-Lago, confirming potentially historic peace talks between North and South Korea.
And they do have my blessing to discuss the end to the war. People don't realize the Korean War has not ended. It's going on right now. And they are discussing an end to the war.
And the president casting doubt on whether he will go ahead with his own one-on-one meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un.
Japan and ourselves are locked, and we are very unified on the subject of North Korea.
The two leaders discussing the possible end of one war, while back in Washington, growing questions about President Trump's strategy in Syria.
What's next? What's the end game? What's the long-term plan?
Today, Congress briefed on last week's missile strike against Syria, a response to the nation's latest chemical attack. But both parties agree a message to Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad is not enough without also punishing his enablers, namely Russia. The White House today still dealing with confusion after UN Ambassador Nikki Haley promised tough new sanctions were imminent.
Secretary Mnuchin will be announcing those on Monday if he hasn't already.
Only to be reversed by the president. The White House saying she spoke out of turn.
Had the president pull that back, whatever the reasons, it's a message to Mr. Putin that he still has an ally in the United States in the president.
The White House saying new sanctions are still under consideration. Blaine Alexander, NBC News, Washington.
This week, the Rick Scott for Florida campaign rolled out its first television and digital ad. It focuses on term limits for members of Congress. In the ad, Scott says every zip code in the United States is in favor of term limits, except for one, Washington. He blames the career politicians who live there for preventing term limits. Scott is now running for the Senate seat against Bill Nelson, who has served since 2001. The Florida Democratic Party responded through an email with the subject line, Rick Scott, career politician with a poor record. The party listed several editorials across the state attacking Scott's character, one even calling him an enemy of public education. President Trump's man on the Supreme Court breaks a tie on crime and immigration case that might just result in a midnight tweet. After rehearing a 4-4 case, Justice Neil Gorsuch mostly sided with the liberal bloc and ruling against part of a law requiring deportation for so-called crimes of violence. In this case, the defendant's crime was burglary. Gorsuch wrote that the law was too vague. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says there's no proof chemical weapons were used in the April 7th attack in Syria. The United States has accused Russia of blocking international inspectors from reaching the site of the suspected chemical attack and said Russians or Syrians have tampered with evidence on the ground. In an interview with BBC, Lavrov denied this. He says relations between Russia and the West are now worse than during the Cold War.
Well, I think it's worse. Because during the Cold War there were channels of communication, and there was no obsession with Russophobia, which looks like, genocide by sanctions.
Inspectors finally reached the scene today looking for evidence of chlorine gas and possibly a nerve agent.